Hello and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host Bryan. We're going to wrap up today with the final track for Deep Cuts Week. Took me a second, brain had to load. We're looking at songs from some of your favorite artists who, the songs just aren't that popular, they don't get requested as often, maybe even fans aren't aware they exist at all. Today we're going to be looking at the artist Jorge Drexler. We're going to be checking out the song segundos de oscuridad. That translates to 12 seconds of darkness, off of an album that shares the same name. Let's dive into this, see what Jorge is bringing to the table today. There is an interesting gap in the middle of that pan where it almost stops. It kind of cuts off for a fraction of a second. Almost like it's two different notes.
Gira el haz de luz para que se vea desde alta mar. Yo buscaba el rumbo de regreso sin quererlo encontrar. Pie detrás de pie, iba tras el pulso de claridad. La noche cerrada apenas se abría, se volvía a cerrar.
I like that doubling up of the vocals on that last bit.
Un faro quieto, nada sería.
I like how the general chord is embellished upon by the arpeggios on the outside.
Mientras no deje de girar.
Nice layering of some interesting vocals or instruments.
Lo que importa en verdad.
So we have bells, strings, tuba, trombone, I think.
12 segundos de oscuridad para que se vea desde alta mar. De poco le sirve al navegante que no sepa esperar.
The vocals are very forward in the mix in a way that I think works. It's an interesting example.
Otra manera de caminar. La noche del cabo revelada en un inmenso radar.
Oh, we have two guitars also.
Un faro para solo de día. Guía mientras no deje de girar. No es la luz lo que importa en verdad.
That uplift here right before
Son los
moving into
12
the chorus.
segundos de oscuridad.
Moving out of the chorus. What was I thinking?
12 segundos de oscuridad. 12 segundos de oscuridad.
The tremolo bowing sounds really nice here. It's a sort of danger on the outskirts. The constant snare rolling. Has that been there the whole time? Yeah, very cool chamber pop right there. I'm all over that. The instrumentation is great, the layering's beautiful, the atmosphere is dense and palpable and almost overwhelming. It definitely reaches a wall of sound style where if I want to, I can pick out certain sounds to focus on, but man, my brain just wants to hear it all as one idea. I think a lot of that just comes down to the density and size of the instruments here. Beautiful stuff, though. And I love his voice. Like I mentioned, let me just talk about this real quick before we move into composition. But his voice is very forward in the mix. It's impossible not to hear it clearly and plainly. At some sections in the lesser layered parts, it almost feels a little too distinct from the rest of the instruments, almost separated from them. Sort of the opposite of like black metal's penchant for putting the lyrics into the mix, where it's pushed in just a little too far and it's hard to hear what's going on with it. This is sort of the opposite, where it's almost distanced too far from the music. But I think it ultimately works out because in the more layered sections, the vocals need to stand out more there to ensure that they do their part, which is be the lead melody, which is to tell the story, which is to be heard clearly. And so it's a smart decision, and one I think that's interesting. My gut instinct would say that during the verse, when there's less going on, to pull the vocals back in a little bit. But it actually seems like it's the right way to go about it, of leaving the vocals a bit detached from the music. Because it's not distracting. And I'd wager most of you didn't even notice it until I pointed it out. It's one of those double-edged swords about listening to music so intently. Something that isn't an issue for most people can become an issue for those paying too close of an attention. Because the thing is, at the end of the day, all art is flawed. There's going to be cracks. And my job as a critic is to look very closely, which means that the cracks are going to be more apparent. Maybe you pull the rug over a crack so most people don't notice it. My job's to pick the rug up and see what's beneath it. The metaphor is not the best, but roll with it, please. And unfortunately, my job here is to sit in front of a camera and say, I pulled up the rug, look what I found. And I hope it doesn't diminish anyone's enjoyment for stuff like this. And like I said, luckily here I think it works well. It is a bit apparent to me, but it's not distracting in any way, and ultimately it needs to be at that level for the chorus anyways. So, like I said, it's a rare example where I think traditionally not great production style ends up working very well in this specific case, and is a really good example of my usual phrase, which I haven't said in forever, which is that everything is a tool in a toolbox. No matter what decision you make for your music, there's no wrong one. There's just ones that are less right for some situations and some decisions that are best for specific, very specific situations. And yeah, I think this one ended up working out really well despite not being something I would do in most songs. 12 seconds of silence. This is interesting. I was kind of expecting, not silence, darkness. I was kind of expecting this to show up in the music somehow, especially with the beginning. So we have that, and then silence. And I was like, okay. This went on for a little bit, like 6 seconds or so. I was like, this is it. This is the 12 seconds. We're going to be in pure sonic darkness here. That didn't happen. It never happened anywhere in the song. I kind of figured this was a good place. They're only 5 seconds off anyways. They should have just went for it. But this Doppler sound, starting from one side, panning to the other, starting soft here, loudest in the middle, softer off to the side. It shows up everywhere. What I think is interesting about it is that it's not just volume, it's not just placement, it's also pitch. It rises subtly in pitch and diminishes subtly in pitch. It isn't jumping up half an octave or something like that. It is a subtle rise in pitch though, and a fall. I think this is interesting because, again, as I pointed out at the beginning, there is a point right in the middle that it's almost two notes: the crescendo and rising pitch, and the decrescendo and falling pitch. There's no sound dead center. I don't know what that's supposed to represent, what that's supposed to mean. I thought maybe I was hearing things the first time I noticed it, which was the second time we heard the Doppler sound, but it was persistent throughout the song. There is nothing dead center. Crescendo into silence, and then a return to that same top volume into a decrescendo. Why? I don't know. If anyone has insight into that, please let me know. It's an interesting choice. I mean, it's basically a bell curve where the top is a very sharp dip down and a spike right back up, and then the rest of the bell curve. And I mean, it's an interesting choice. I'm talking about it. Maybe that's the only reason they wanted to do it, was because it was interesting. But I can't see any purpose to it, what it might mean narratively. It's just really neat. That's the intro. We get a couple of those against kind of silence. From here, we bring in some guitars, a very light percussion presence. The vocals come in, and this is where I start to fall in love with the song. Granted, this is also where the song starts proper. Before that, we just had a sound effect. But it's gorgeous. Because what starts off is pretty simple: guitars, percussion, melody, vocals. Evolves. We bring in more and more instruments. What's cool too is that I don't know if I could pinpoint exactly where the verse becomes the chorus. It feels like it's just generally a slow burn across both of these. Maybe the lyrics are the same and that's about it between the two choruses, and that would be how you would tell them apart. When the new lines stop and the vocals return to the phrase, the stanza that we heard last time we went to this section. But on a musical level, I even mentioned it there at the end. I was like, oh, okay, this is a nice uplift to go into the chorus. Oh, wait, this is the end of the chorus. Yeah, there's no real point to where the chorus starts musically. It's a part of that initial slow burn. And the whole slow burn is gorgeous. We start off with the arpeggiation in the guitars. One guitar is strumming chords, the other one's arpeggiating chords. It provides a little bit of movement and pitch changes alongside traditional harmonic foundation work. Very standard idea, but always works well. If you ever feel like just strumming chords is a bit boring, arpeggiate those chords with another instrument. Bam, you have movement and it sounds gorgeous. Every time. It's so simple. So we have that. We have the melody on top. I love his voice. It's very soft and almost, I don't want to say lacking effort, but it's like it's effortless. That's the word I want, which is kind of similar to lacking effort, but I think has a different connotation to it. It feels like it doesn't cost him any energy to do this. It's just a natural extension of himself. It is wonderful. It's completely chill and relaxed. Not chill, it's relaxed, while still having the energy of a brighter tone and some higher pitches. It's wonderful for what's going on here. I think you could probably get away with something on the inverse side of things, a bit more of a lower voice. Something in the middle I feel like is going to fall a bit flat compared to the dynamic qualities of everything else here, unless you just have a voice. Right? You just have that natural character of tone. You could probably get away with any range. But I think for something like this, I'd probably go with a bit higher, like Jorge went with, or a bit lower. But the low energy, effortlessness is definitely, it works well with this. And here's the cool thing, right? So from here, we begin to add more percussion. We begin to add xylophone. We begin to add violins. We begin to add brass. I know I heard tuba, possibly a trombone, maybe a trumpet that just wasn't blasting high up there in the register. Um, there's probably some other stuff in here too. I couldn't tell you. There's a lot of layers going on. And like I said, all of it forms into a wall of sounds. Despite having a clear high fidelity production, it's okay being this amorphous conglomerate of sound, of atmosphere. I really like this. It walks a very fine line between wall of sound and total individual presence. And I love that. I think it's the best middle ground you can have. It's from a critical side, allows me to hear everything clearly if I want to. But I think musically, the atmosphere is what's king here. The individual ideas, yeah, some of them are fine. Particularly, I like the melody on the xylophone. No, glockenspiel. Glockenspiel. It sounds great. It's some cool counterpoint to the vocals, and I like its timbre specifically against a lot more warmer sounds like the violin and the tuba and the guitars. You have this bright, plinky kind of sound, I think, that cuts through everything and creates some timbre contrast. Very cool stuff all around, from the sound of it to the composition. Even the tuba, which would normally be a bit more of a background instrument, has some moving, unique lines. I think that's awesome. It's also given a bit of presence in the mix, and I can usually pick it out. It's the instrument that I think stands out the most from the wall of sounds. But the general idea here, to me, isn't the individual instruments. I'm glad that they were worked together into this wonderful puzzle. But I think what's really important is just the weight of it all, and I think it's what makes his vocals more interesting. There's so many layers, and they're all doing their own thing but coming together into this whole. And as they form up around the song and the layers come in, normally I use this visual of stacking layers, putting one on top of the other. But I think here it actually works really well, because I mentioned that his vocals feel very distinct, placement-wise, from everything else. It feels distant from the music, but that when we bring the layers in, it helps to be able to hear the vocalist having them a bit outside of it. A lot of that is because the instruments are loud and domineering in the mix. In a sense, all the instruments are coming in around him, filling in the space and sort of drowning his vocals out. I'll tell you, in the verses, I don't understand Spanish very well. I took a few years of it, but you really need to talk slow and use more kid level language for me to understand. I'm not going to pick it up in a song. But around the chorus time, when things start to get really big, I have a tough time even making out the syllables or the words from him. The music's drowning him out. It really is. I don't know if this is the intended reading of the song, but it's what I've felt during it. And part of that might be the album art, which, I'll pull this up for you real quick. It looks like an ocean with some sort of light buoy. What is that word? B-O-U-Y. Why can't I think? Buoy? Anyways, off on the distance. You got the sky, you got the water, and I think the interesting thing is that the water is around the middle level of the picture, which means that it's coming up to the ocular part of the picture, whether it's from a person's eyes or from the camera or whatever. We're almost right at water level. The water's coming up. So it's quite possible I was influenced by this. But all the instruments drowning out the vocals, as far as the mix goes, it adds to that. Plus we have the weightiness of it. We have the warmth of a lot of it, which reminds me of the way that sound gets muffled underwater. it ends up being a rather emotionally evocative song for me. I'm curious what the lyrics are, but this is pretty much my take on it. The second verse reduces the water down back to some sustainable levels. Maybe we're treading water again, but the slow burn across the second verse into the second chorus is drowning out the vocals once again. There's no release from it. Even the idea of the Doppler sound effect at the beginning feels like radar pinging, or whatever the proper term is for that. Um, it all feels very watery to me, I think, is the end result, which is interesting because, I mean, glockenspiels, light, airy, semi falsetto vocals, even tuba and trumpet, they're not necessarily instruments I would use for a watery theme. Violins, yeah, I think that's on point. Guitars, not great, but I've heard watery sounds with guitar in them before. And I think it's really interesting that despite that, these instruments not traditionally used with this feeling of water, it still all comes together into something that feels warm and amorphous and overpowering. It's it's a beautifully dense track, and like I said right after the song was over, it is gorgeous Baroque pop, and no, chamber pop. Yeah, that's what I said, and it is. I love chamber pop, I do, and I think we've checked out Jorge before on this channel, maybe during a live stream though. I feel like I need to listen to more of him. This song really clicked with me. Compositionally, production wise, it strikes a perfect balance between complex writing and digestibility. I think even your common pop music listener would still enjoy this. Like I said, a lot of the complexity kind of gets flattened out in the wall of sound, and if you're just looking for an aesthetic or a vibe, like I think a lot of modern listeners are, with a melody on top of it, this fills that role rather well. It just finds some depth, poor choice of words for a song about drowning, to that. Let me read some lyrics, see what's going on there, and then we'll wrap this one up. Oh, ho, 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 now this is clever. See, this is what I'm talking about. Right? You don't even know what I'm talking about yet. I ain't explained it, but I'm giddy. I'm digging this. The song is about being lost at sea. And it's not about drowning, at least not in the literal sense of water rising up, but about, well, what was in the song title, being consumed and swallowed by darkness. Verse 1 says, "Turn the beam of light so that it can be seen from the high seas. I was looking for the way back without wanting to find it. Foot after foot I was following the pulse of clarity. The dark night barely opened, and then it closed again." The beam of light from the beacon is a lighthouse, and he wants it directed straight at him so he can constantly see it. One foot after the other, metaphorically, or maybe the lighthouse is a metaphor, however you want to look at it, is following the pulse of clarity. Anytime he has vision, he takes some steps forward. But it says as soon as the dark night opens, it closes once again. So when the lighthouse shines the light in his direction, it opens the darkness out, or pushes the darkness away, cuts through it, but the lighthouse continues to rotate and the darkness swamps back in. You have a moment of clarity followed by confusion, darkness, not knowing where to go. And this is where the chorus kicks in with the meaning of the title, which you've probably figured out already. A still lighthouse nothing would be. It's a guide as long as it doesn't stop turning. But it's not the light that really matters. It's the 12 seconds of darkness. When you have the blip that lets you know where you are, where you need to go. The moment of clarity followed by several several moments of stumbling in the darkness for one fleeting moment of direction. That concept in and of itself is brilliant, but to tie it to a lighthouse, to make the music have these moments of clarity, only to be swamped by the darkness again, for all of that to go away, to come back. I almost wonder, and it would be super genius if it did, if those moments of, at the beginning of the verse, of just the guitars and the drums, if that is 1/12 of the larger phrase, the larger slow burn. And so while maybe not necessarily exactly 12 seconds, it is still 1/12 of the phrasing, the section itself, devoted to this open clarity followed by the rising and impeding darkness, creating the wall of sound that gets cut through after that first chorus back into the second verse. That would be very cool. I don't think that's what really happened here, but that is something I would aim for. Just high concept composition right there. Verse 2 goes in the same idea about needing navigation and just doing things as you can, one foot after another, waiting for that moment of clarity. And chorus 2 brings back the exact same things from chorus 1. Nothing new there. And the idea of hoping beyond hope, that instead of this blip of clarity, of light, of direction, says, can't you just shine it in my direction? Just point it towards me. Get rid of the darkness permanently. But of course you can't. And just kind of hoping for a little bit more help instead of these little temporary handouts. Gorgeous, absolutely wonderful on a lyrical level, the way it works in with the music, even the idea of the Doppler that we have, what I kind of associated more with a radar submarine. Still, the lighthouse. It's a sonic representation of the amount of light that's given to you, just off the periphery of it until it sweeps over you. The moment when it's dead on and you're sort of blinded, which I think is the blank spot in the middle of this Doppler effect, until it scoops around you. You're back getting a periphery of the light, and then the darkness fades back in and you have to wait for it to spin around the entire lighthouse again. Yeah. Yes, this song is thematically resonant on every single level, and it's easy on the ears on top of that. Congratulations, Jorge. This was fantastic. If you don't have a sense of pride for writing this, I don't know, man. This is very near to a perfect song, as far as I'm concerned. It has everything I would want, and it is so cohesive on so many levels. Just so good. So good. I can't say the word so enough. I don't have the vocabulary to accurately describe it without my bonus modifiers. It was so great. Ah, man, those are my thoughts. Jorge Drexler's 12 segundos de oscuridad. What do you think of this track? Is there anything that stood out to you? Anything that you would like to add on to what I said or correct me on? Maybe just have your own take on the song. Let me know. Put all that stuff down in the comments section. Above that, in the description box, you'll find a link to Linktree. Takes you here. You can find links to my music, ways to support the channel, a link to the Discord server, and so much more. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three of those. That wraps it up for this one, and it kind of wraps up the whole week too, doesn't it? We do have some new music reaction coming out, well, if you're watching this live, in 30 seconds. Otherwise, I'll be back tomorrow, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 10 p.m. UTC as usual. We're going to check out a full album. Until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever you choose to watch my videos.